Welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Seat podcast. My name is Melanie, and today Alana and I are joined by our lovely friend Shannon. Shannon is a co-facilitator for our up-and-coming Once Upon a Mushroom Return of the Inner Child retreat that we are organizing, which is all oriented around inner child work. This is a conversation that Alana and I have been looking forward to, so thank you so much for joining us here today on the podcast, Shannon. We're happy to be here with you.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here, and I'm so glad that we can be doing this together. So I'm looking forward to jumping in and having a great little chat today. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited you're here. So I think we wanted to just kind of start out today's chat with, first of all, defining what even is inner child work and how do we engage in that?
Good question. Where would you like to start with that? It's such a big topic. Where do you start?
Well, I feel like inner child.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I feel like inner child work is definitely a form of part work. It's a form of working with your inner parts in a way that allows you to see them objectively and hold space for them. And so what are your thoughts on how you can utilize inner child work in your spiritual practice, in your life?
Great question. I can give you a really great example of myself. Just actually last night, we were talking about gene keys, and we were in a gene key that talks a lot about our time of our life when we're in our teenage years, which is our mental realm, and a lot happened for me during that time. And as we were talking, I really felt a lot come up of the sadness of all the trauma that had happened during that time. And so I went to bed, first of all, like kind of binge ate a little bit. That's my pattern. And then today I still felt that energy. So I decided I need to sit with my teenager and really feel her. So I had a beautiful meditation where I just sat there and imagined myself as that teenager and really had her. She was a full-grown teenager. She was about 16 in my vision, and she was curled up in my lap, and I just stroked her hair. I let her suck her thumb. She was still sucking her thumb at that age. And I just rocked her and held her and rubbed her back, which are all the things that I didn't get when I was that age. And it was something that I really needed at that age. And so to have that for myself as I'm the parent now, to comfort, to soothe that part of myself that really went through a lot at that age. And that felt really, really beautiful and supportive and loving, to be able to do that for myself, to nurture myself in an age where I didn't have anybody to do that for me. So I get to go back and do that for myself. And it's a beautiful practice when things are coming up for me.
I love that. And it also kind of leads to that aspect of inner child work, is that inner children, or children in general, if we look at the concept of being a child, we exist in a family unit. We exist with our mother and our father and our grandparents and our friends and our support systems. And oftentimes, like you said, you weren't given these things that you're now giving yourself as an inner child, as a teenager. Now, when we're kind of addressing some of these wounded parts or less integrated parts from our childhood, oftentimes we have to go back and reparent. We have to give ourselves, these inner children, the space to meet their needs and be with them and feel through things. So I love that. It's a beautiful example.
Because we didn't have the tools when we were that age. We didn't. So now that we're older and we know the tools, we know what we needed, then we can go back and use those tools and be the parent that we never had to ourselves.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
absolutely. What do you think, Melanie?
Yeah, I think it's a really good story as an example, because you're a teenager and you're not a baby in that story. And I think when we talk about inner child work, a lot of the times we imagine like infancy or like really young, right? Like 4 or 5. And this brings up part of the dynamic of inner child work, which has been really expansive for me, is realizing that I have multiple inner children. There are multiple young Melanies that are emotionally frozen in different previous states and dynamics that need some TLC to be brought back into the present moment, back into my life, back into my body, and integrated and loved for where they were at that time, and then kind of unfrozen from that time period. So it's a cool example because I think it breaks the confines that sometimes inner child work can be limited by. It's not just there's not just one inner Shannon or Alana or Melanie. There are many of us. They need different things. They're usually at different ages. Sometimes they have aspects of different parts of you trickled and sprinkled into one. And it is a big landscape, but it's definitely, I think, like we've already talked about, it gives us that opportunity to reparent, to look at different family dynamics, and we can go back with that objective adult eye and meet needs, observe, analyze, and I think unthaw, process, and feel those emotions that have kept us stuck in the first place. So I love this story. It's also we're all doing this gene key container together where we cover the different cycles. So for people who might not know, there is different developmental cycles that imprinting happens. And the age period between 14 and 21 is where a lot of our mental patterns come from. And that's really a big part of the gene key container we're in right now. So it's been such a cool opportunity to expand even further into looking at the ways inner children work and inner child work can be inner teenage work, inner 5-year-old work, inner 7-year-old work, inner 22-year-old work, inner 30-year-old work. There are different parts of us that get left in the dark throughout our lives in those heavy emotional, traumatic, shocking, different dynamics that we just kind of emotionally get stuck and freeze in. And yeah, it's a great way to start this conversation because there's many rabbit holes.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that because, yeah, a lot of people think when they think inner child work that it's just a young child. When I had looking like I'm a fully grown adult when really I'm not. I'm not fully grown up here in my mental sphere. So I have a fully grown girl in my lap instead of this small little girl. She's a big girl, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be this small little girl in my lap. It can be this lost, wounded, teenage, young adult girl that needed some help and some resources and some love. So yes, thank you for mentioning that because that's so true. It's not just a small child. It's all of our parts at all the ages.
And I like that aspect too, that we're talking about like the different ages, like we just said, because we can gain a lot of information. I think when we start doing inner child work, it can be kind of confusing because what happens is we often something gets triggered and it's almost like we regress into like seeing through those eyes often. And so like, it's like the child, we become that inner child. And we can see that maybe in the way we respond in our relationships, the way we respond to situations. And each age kind of has its own, like you said, theme. Like that age group is more like in the mental sphere, there's some issues. Certain age groups might be more emotional. Certain might be more connected to spirit. And if you're working with an inner 2-year-old, the reality is that inner 2-year-old might not have the language or ways to explain things. And so you can regress that far back and feel like a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum. And I've had bouts of anxiety that kind of feel flavored like that sometimes. And so to get curious about our triggers, I think is a good place to start. I don't know what you think about that, but
yeah, absolutely. Because you're, like you say, if you're acting from a 2-year-old stance, you really do feel like you're having a tantrum on the floor and wanting to like throw your legs and arms around and scream. But yet when we're acting from our teenage time or our young adult time, we could be that rebellious FUs. I don't know if I can say that, but we can like be that aggressive teenage part in our relationships and not realizing that this isn't just the 2-year-old having a tantrum. This is a teenager who is like rebellious and no, you're not going to make me do this and I can do whatever I want. And so it's a different energy that you can meet that part of yourself, not just as this temper tantrum of a 2-year-old, you're dealing with a rebellious teenager now, so there's lots of different energies, definitely.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of a saying I throw around often, and I can't remember who or where I heard it from. So credit to where credit is due. I just don't remember where it comes from. But if it is hysterical, it's historical. So when we're in a moment or something in our relationships or in our current life dynamic has triggered and brought forth a really massive emotional reaction, for me, it's one of the first ways I know that if I'm responding in anything even remotely close to hysteria, there is a historical wound here. There's something that has shown up for me previously in my life, and now I'm stepping into the weight of that emotional response and maybe the limited tools I had at the first time that I experienced it, and now I'm showing up with that energy and embodying that or origin wound in this moment. So that's been a lovely, I guess, easy way for me to remember, and a good framework that if it's hysterical, it's historical, and there might be something worth looking at. And it's been a good way that has spurred me down those rabbit holes in those directions to go and find those little parts of me that still have some skin in the game on a previous emotional unfinished cycle or dynamic.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't always have to be hysterical. It could be like what I recognized last night as binge eating. It could be like, what am I doing right now that isn't healthy, that I've done before, that isn't helping me grow as the person I want to be. And so if I know that I am isolating, if I am binge eating, if I am, what else? I'm trying to think of some other examples. I'll just pause for a second. If I'm doing things that I know aren't healthy for myself, and it doesn't have to be hysterical, it's something that I need to look at. Oh, I'm binge eating. Oh, I'm isolating. Those are the things I need. Okay, there's something in me that needs to be addressed. And so hysterical and other things that are holding me back in growing further as a better person.
Yeah, like out of alignment.
Out of alignment. That's a good way to put it. Thank you.
And I think that it's also like that kind of that whole process there you just mentioned leads to like kind of the first step of inner child work, which is that like recognizing that moment when you recognize, oh, there's been a shift within me, there's that trigger, and then we need to shift into that objective mind, or I almost view it like shifting into the parent and putting the child. So it's like, okay, I see your inner child, I see you're having a moment. Let me shift and zoom out and look at this from the bigger picture, from my adult eyes, and meet the needs instead of allowing that child to like hijack your life and play out these old, outdated, protective patterns that we created. It's always good to know, like to remember, like all of those things you mentioned, all of those coping patterns, they were protective and they served a purpose that helped you probably for many years in your life, protect you and get your needs met. And so there's some innocence in that with inner child work that I think that needs to be recognized. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know what you guys think about that.
I'd like to jump in on that with our survival mechanisms. And what I've learned in my training and facilitating is that when we have a trauma happen in our life, what happens is we split off. And when we split off, it's our strategy of coping that takes over, and then so that we can move forward in our development. Because if we let that trauma take over and we don't have a strategy to cope, then our development is stunted then. So in order for us to move forward in our development, we have to go, okay, let's find a strategy to cope with all this so that I can develop in other ways in my life. But then that's the split where we are stunted in our development in a different way. So now that strategy of, like, there's the 5 different ways of, there's the 5 different ways of coping. You've got your fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or frenzy. So any of those can take over when we have that trauma. So then that's the coping mechanism that will start to take over so that we can move forward in our development.
That is the conversation that we've had before around holding space for ourselves as adults, is what comes to mind when we talk about having those reactions, right? Or falling into a state of those fight or flight responses, and then being able to call attention and awareness to the dynamic that's going on and hold space for that part of ourselves, while also not allowing and or enabling that sort of behavior to redirect our lives as well. I love the conversation and learning and diving deeper into the different five ways of responding. It's was very illuminating and enlightening for me when I discovered that, hey, in different moments I have different reactions, and it was an important part of my journey to learn that those weren't necessarily parts of my personality and or character. They were reactions, survival strategies, things that kept me alive. And like Alana clarified and said, there's like beautiful things that served me in the moment and got me through situations that I needed them to, right? But they can, of course, and obviously become maladaptive and no longer serve us in our evolution. But that is something that we talked a lot about in the episode on the podcast where we talked about holding space, and how one of the ways I feel like I hold the most space in my life for anybody is for myself, having to hold space for my internal dynamics, the different parts of me that show up, different emotional reactions, responses, and being able to take that potent pause, those few deep breaths to get that perspective, to hold that space. And then from there, you get to respond and not react, whether that's externally or internally. You get to respond and hold space and provide what's truly needed in that moment for the different parts of you that are showing up, the stored emotions, our inner children, or tailor, remove ourselves and respond more appropriately in the external world and show up in alignment with who we might want to be. But that really brings up the topic of holding space for ourselves for me when we're talking about this part of inner child work.
Absolutely. And we have a whole podcast all about holding space, which we can link below. So you can go into all those ways and find some strategies for yourself. Because holding space, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing with these parts of ourselves, these inner child pieces, is holding space for meeting their needs, is teaching them that they're safe and it's okay to be feeling what they're feeling and to move through those spaces. And it can be hard, like when you've been avoiding feeling something, a feeling that maybe in your body as a child you didn't understand, you weren't ever taught. I don't know about you as a child, emotional intelligence wasn't really something that was taught. It was just don't have emotions. And so we didn't feel safe feeling things. And so now it's like you get to tell that inner child to feel safe. But when you felt unsafe for so long, it's a vulnerable place. It's not easy. And you have to feel through all the sensations, all the feelings, like you mentioned with the nervous system of all those different responses we can have becomes very nervous system somatic work. And there's like, that's such a rich realm to be able to dive into and look at. Yeah, so I'd love to hear, some of your, like I know your example you gave at the beginning was some great strategies, but what are some other strategies that we could engage in that might allow us to process some of these old stuck emotions and frozen parts of ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. There's so many different exercises and modalities. I find for my, I'd like to share the very first time it was so strong that I connected with my inner child. And this can be very common for people who've never done this work before. And it was an inner child meditation where I was going into a hypnosis to go and even just meet my inner child. Like some people have never even met their inner child. And I remember that I saw her at the bottom of these stairs and she did not want me to go anywhere near her. She was so guarded. She had her back to me. And this is something that is, people think, oh, when I meet my inner child, it's going to be this beautiful reunion. Sometimes it isn't, because they've been neglected for so long that they are like, I don't know you, or at least I don't trust you. That's a big thing. That can be very big for a lot of people. They don't even trust themselves to come and rescue them. So just being, first of all, very patient. I think that's a huge thing, is to be extremely patient with, I will stay at the top of the stairs and I will just be here. You don't need to do anything. I'm not going to pressure you into anything that you do not feel comfortable with, because a lot of times as a child, we're expected to go and hug grandma and kiss grandpa. And maybe we didn't want to, there was a lot of boundary crossing as a child, that now you're sitting there with your inner child, trying to connect with your inner child. And she's got some boundaries she wants to express that she never had before. So just having the patience to, I will sit here. What do you need right now? What do you need? What do you want? Is there anything I can do for you at this moment? You still want me to be, far away? That's okay. Thank you. Thank you for telling me what your boundaries are, because you never had a chance to tell anybody what your boundaries were growing up. So thank you for telling me. And so really honoring the whatever that child needs in that moment, because it may take a lot of time to build that trust, to build that security and love, and just being with that inner child. So I think that's a first step, is just to connect with that inner child with absolutely no expectation on what that inner child is going to do or want or need. There's other ways, such as automatic writing. With automatic writing, you have your dominant hand as sort of your parent hand, and your non-dominant hand as your inner child hand. So what you start with is your parent hand, just ground and center first. Take a minute to breathe and don't expect anything to come up right away. This does take a little bit of practice as well. Again, your inner child needs to trust you, and that can take some time. So you can start, hi, how are you? How old are you? How can I help you? And you switch the pen to the other side. And without thinking, because there can be some, this is stupid, what am I doing? This feels really, uncomfortable. But just let the pen go. And whatever comes up, it could be anger, it could be sadness, they could be 5, they could be 10. But just let them write whatever they want and respond, switch it over. I'm sorry you feel that way, validating this part that is coming forward. Thank you for showing up. Again, is there anything you need? Is there anything you want? What can I help you with? Keep the conversation going by flipping the pen back and forth and having that conversation. You can also do that through even just painting. If you're more of an expressive, artistic person, you can have the paintbrush in your opposite non-dominant hand, and you let that part pick out the colors. You let that part just paint away. You can use your fingers. You can use anything you want to be expressive, and let it come through in a more creative, non-thinking linear way. It can come through in a beautiful, expressive, creative, artistic way. So there's lots of different examples of ways that you can connect with your inner child that are very effective. Yeah.
I love that. Do you have any specific strategies, Melanie, that you work with?
I think for me, I suppose you could call it a strategy. A lot of my inner children, in my experience, don't need me to do anything other than let them have a seat at the table. So I like how you talked about patience being a big dynamic, because there was nothing for adult reparenting Melanie in there to do for that child, to do for, there wasn't, whether like hugs or something like that, sometimes like in different parts required things like that, or permission to show up a certain way. It's usually, for me, giving a judgment-free hall pass to whatever inner child is showing up to just express and take up space however they need to. That's always been my first and biggest step in my process, is like, I have no expectations, like Shannon said. But a biggest thing for me is, especially because I have a habit of being a doer, I didn't want to put that on a lot of the inner children or in my internal dynamic. I was very intentional about like, you have every right to take up however much space, however like whatever you need, do it all. And it was just a big permission slip. And I think without requiring so much to be done, I think that was enough for a lot of, at least a lot of my younger inner children in particular, though those are the ones that are coming to mind. A lot of the younger dynamics was just like, see me, feel me, hear me, listen to me, watch me, celebrate me, let me be at the table, let me talk without telling me I talk too much, really innocent little, like that real little girl energy, look at my tutu and I'm going to sing for the whole family at Christmas, right? A lot of that stuff, they just needed to have a spot at the table. So that was really healing, and something that I had to keep in mind is that it might not be something for me to do or fix in here. I might just have to bear witness and allow. So that has been a big pivotal part in my experience, but I can see how some of my more teenage aspects that are coming up might require some intentional, like, reparation steps or specific, because I was old enough to be involved in some self-betrayal at that age as well. So there are internal parts of me and internal dynamics that I actually have to be accountable for as well. So it's definitely an interesting internal world. And if you're new to parts work or inner child work, this is the point in which you think we're crazy and we're all schizophrenic and have multiple personalities in there. And you know what? In a way, that's true.
So true. Yeah, no, I love it about just really allowing your inner child to be and like sit with. And yeah, so I think like that is like, it's an intuitive type of work. And I think like in my work with clients in clinical hypnotherapy, a lot of the times that like it leads into an inner child part. And that conversation aspect, I think, is really I've seen to be really important. And also like releasing, like, as you can get clear on the pattern and the way that they've been protecting you, giving them the opportunity when they're ready to release that role, when they feel trusting to be like, oh, okay, yeah, let's work together and find a new way forward, where you get to be a kid again and you don't have to take on these adult concepts, these adult roles that ideally your parent probably should have taken on. But I mean, we don't come with a manual, so nobody's to really blame necessarily. But it's important that we work and find that new way forward and release these patterns as well, which do take time and patience, like you mentioned as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I find when I'm working with my clients and we have different parts coming up, it's interesting when you say that, Melanie, that, am I being schizophrenic? When you're working with, when there is 4 different parts all having a conversation together, there's the one part of us that is the angry teenager, another part of us that is the terrified toddler. There's the other part that is the mental, I know what's best and I have all the answers. There's even parts of us that are actually attached to our parents. So if we have this attachment to our mother, for example, which is usually a very common, then we're trying to please mother in any way that will please mother. And that is sort of the enmeshment and entanglement of how I should be so that mom will love me more. And then that is an untanglement too. And so then we can even bring mom energy we can bring mom energy into the session to help all of a sudden switch the parts and go, oh no, mom is here. Now what do we do? And then the whole dynamic starts to shift and move. And it's this almost like live, organic conversation that starts to really, sway and move or get stuck. And then then we got to move through that stuck part. And yeah, so it's very interesting to see a session and to see what happens when all the parts start to talk to each other and how we relate to our parts, because we can be just as abusive, if not more, to our parts. And it's realizing from an outsider perspective, oh, I'm really doing this to myself. I'm really talking to myself in a very abusive way. And that can be the part of us that is the observer, like you were saying before, to be like, now I understand why I'm so hard on myself, because here's this part of me that is abusing this little 2-year-old that doesn't feel like I deserve that love. And so we can see that more in these kinds of sessions.
Absolutely. And I think like when we start this conversation, especially for people who are new to inner child work, some people can kind of get, I've heard this before, like, well, I had a great childhood, you know, but I think what we don't realize is like inner children, like all humans, reach challenging aspects. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a super traumatic experience that you went through. It could be like, I don't know, somebody wouldn't share their toy with me, and we can create like this whole belief system around not being worthy or fill in the blank, whatever it is, that like gets reinforced in that moment. And so I don't know if you can speak to that, either of you.
Absolutely. And it isn't just what our trauma is, it can be generational trauma. Absolutely. So what I like to call is our trauma biography of what happened to us from in utero. So we can even feel when we're in our mother's belly, what is happening. Were we wanted? Was this an unexpected pregnancy? Was there fighting with the parents? Was there something going on? Was your mother even, had morning sickness, like really sick? Or was there a difficult birth? Was there separation at birth? That could be nobody's fault. But if you're separated from your mom, if you're a preemie, that is really traumatic. Or if you are having your mom is having a lot of difficulty with her pregnancy, you feel that. That's very traumatic. And as for the generational trauma, it could be, say, your maternal mom coming in and trying to tell you what to do, or all of her traumas are coming in, and all the messages from grandmother and great grandmother are coming in to imprint that onto our trauma as well. And that's very interesting to unravel the generational trauma as well. So it's not just our own trauma biography, it can be the trauma biography of our grandparents too. Yeah.
So true.
What really made that concept sink in for me, the fact that, or I guess how I puzzled it out, is that it's not necessarily what is done to us that is the trauma. It is how we interpret and record those things that can make it traumatic and therefore ingrained and influential. Or that's the difference, right? Same people can live same events and have entirely different experiences, because for one person it's perceived X, Y, and Z, and for another it's the perception that changes that can make things more traumatic. And what made that concept hit home for me and really made it something I could sit with and understand was the fact that I've seen and I've watched 2-year-olds get scared about something that is innocent, right? But when a child is 2 and has zero comprehension, no understanding, and no other framework, it scared them. So it's not necessarily that uncle jumped out from behind the couch and scared the 2-year-old's dad. That's not a bad thing. That's not a quote unquote trauma, but scared the heck out of the 2-year-old, thought dad was in danger. 2-year-old's body records this as, traumatic danger event, fight or flight. And you are, boom, snapshot, frozen in time. And that is something that you're going to have to move and shift through in that physiological memory that our body can really hold for us, which we talk about this often. Traumas, emotions, they get stored like a hard drive in our bodies. And I think especially with our parts work and the inner child work, we're really excavating some of those physical and deeply ingrained emotional responses and memories, especially in the younger years when we don't necessarily have a developed mental realm or a clear understanding of emotional dynamics. A lot of that is really physiological, and it's beyond the words, like we've talked about. It's beyond, clear understanding. So it was an interesting and really life-changing dynamic for me when I realized that trauma can be literally anything, because how a 2-year-old perceives something is different than how a 3-year-old perceives something. Mm-hmm. There's no innate good or bad in someone's experience of a dynamic, and it being influentially, not saying that right, but wounding for that person in that specific way. Influentially. There we go. I got it. Figured it out. There is something else that I also want to, I think, get Shannon and your views on, Alana. We've talked about both now, inner child work and parts work. And I think maybe just talking a little bit about what might make them different. I know for me, inner child work usually feels like there is a part of me or a dynamic that is emotionally frozen in a younger state, right? Because it brings in that time aspect for me. There's a delineation. There's a historical aspect. It happened before, it's getting triggered now. I have to go back, I have to reevaluate. And that brings in that inner child work, where parts work in my working definition is a lot more of like what's showing up here right now. And I know, Alana, you talked about following some of that parts work back to usually like a core wound or an inner child part, for example. So what are your guys' thoughts on the differences, if there are many, and if there are like the subtle nuances between the parts work and inner child work? Because I know that they can be both talked about in the same space a lot.
Just mentioning, there is some construction going on around my place. You might hear a sound in the background. Hopefully it doesn't come across completely in the podcast, but if it does, we apologize. Yeah. So I can jump in on that. For me, obviously inner child work is a type of parts work. So it is like working on parts of ourselves that, again, maybe are out of alignment, but there can be many other aspects of self out of alignment, whether it's certain belief systems. Sometimes they can stem back to an inner child part. Sometimes they can stem back to a generational wound. Sometimes we create different aspects of ourselves that are just rooted in collective wounding. So like, and yeah, like I agree with you, Melanie, on what you said about whatever's relevant now. And so sometimes it's like, sometimes an inner child comes up, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I'm working in that inner family parts kind of area, like you kind of alluded a little bit to, Shannon. It's like sometimes we have to work with our own inner mother in recognizing that we learned from our mother how to parent ourselves, how to mother ourselves. We model that naturally, vibrationally through what we were taught as children. So it's kind of in a way this inner family system, and that like sometimes we need to work with that inner mother part, and how can we show up differently? And that can be challenging to bring consciousness to those parts that have run unconsciously in the patterns that we have learned for so long. I've also worked a lot with like the inner masculine and feminine, not necessarily from a parental perspective. Worked with like inner tyrant kind of energy, some of those more archetypal parts that can kind of come up as well too. So I see it as more like an all-encompassing term, parts work, and inner child work, inner family work gets more specific. But yeah, that's my view.
I agree. That is a good synopsis of what it is. It's just one of the pieces of the puzzle. I do think it's important though, because like we've talked about on the podcast often, is so many people use terms and then they never say what that term means. And it's like the hill I die on. I'm like, what are we talking about? Let's define it. Let's make sure everybody knows what we mean when we say parts work, and child work. I would agree is definitely a subset of parts work. And I actually really love that you brought up the archetypal dynamic, because so much of parts work, so much of that archetypal energy that we bring in, that is all tied into the gene keys, that is tied into astrology, that is the dynamics that a lot of people I think are working within, and they're not really aware that that falls under a category of parts work, of a part of you stepping into a specific archetype or embodying a frequency, an energy, a dynamic. Even the dynamics between the masculine and the feminine, like you said. So different traits are included in different parts, different archetypes. And that leads me to the next important thing I think I want to talk about with you guys, is the fact that this isn't something that's linear, and or there's no deadline in which you're going to solve all the problems of your inner children and not have to do this dance. Because in a way it's like, okay, well, I only have so much history. I was only 5 for so long. I can only go through all my 5-year-old stuff for a year, right? But this is something that has taught me patience so much. And it's something that in a way this spiritual path is innately tied to, whether it's inner child work or parts work. We constantly play within this field in the spiritual path. And I think at least within the work Alchemia does. So I would love to hear a bit of your guys's dynamic around the continuation of this work, because for me it's definitely not been something that has a end in sight.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's ever an end to anybody's growth. We all are constantly growing and evolving, and within every growth and evolving level, there's going to be a new energy of, oh, look at that. There's that part again. I thought I already dealt with that. And here it is all over again in a whole new way. Like it's almost like a new mask in a different play, you know? And so it can, all we can do is be better with how we show up when it does come up again and again and again. And how present can we be to sit with that part of ourselves even better every time different. And instead of letting the emotions just take us over, now we can go, oh, there you are again. Thank you. Thank you for showing up. Okay, well, what do you need today? What is it that I can help you with today? What would you like? Would you like a bath? Would you like, something like, what is it now that you'd like? And it's like a child that's always coming back to you, mommy, 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 mommy. And okay, well, what do you need now? So,
Oh my gosh, that totally brings up that like patience piece again. And like to all the parents out there, like the well of patience it takes to be a parent is like it's the same with your own inner children, right? And so that's you can kind of look to the role of being a parent in the external world and utilize that within your inner child work. And I've even heard, I'm not a parent at this point, I know you are, but it's like the wounds that get kind of brought up again as you're being a parent of having to revisit also these different ages as you're parenting another being, that's also like I think a form of inner child work as well too, is being a parent to another being.
I think that's really what drove me into this work.
I love that. Love to hear about that.
Absolutely. I mean, when my son was going through some extremely difficult parts of himself, I had to look at, wow, I am not being a very good parent right now. And so if I'm not being a very good parent, it was really just looking at how I'm showing up for him. Then it started to evolve into, well, how do I show up for myself? And I was very clueless because I felt like I was always in a survival mode in most of my life. And then when I had to be very conscious of what am I actually doing here affecting another person, how do I do that to myself then? If I'm reacting so strongly to what my son is doing, is this how I show up for myself? So I had to really do a lot of like, oh, interesting. Self-reflection. Then it came into, okay, well then maybe I need to do what I wish I had done for myself at that age. So yeah, a lot of interesting stuff from when my son was younger.
So fascinating. Yeah. Melanie, I'd love to hear a little bit about, your journey with inner child work, if there's anything that you want to add there.
I think we hear a lot, and you see, especially on social media, those like cute little sayings like "Don't let your inner child die," or like that call to stay connected to your inner child. And that's something I think, at least more recently, that I have been playing around with, is not only visiting my inner children or those dynamics in myself when I perceive something is wrong or heavy or needing to be addressed because it's a problem, but staying in touch with those inner dynamics of myself when I am very excited, or when I'm in joy, or when I am losing 6 hours of a day painting something. That is just as much a deep connection to my inner child for me, and something I would count as child work, as when I am taking that time to contemplate, meditate, and bring forward some of those more sticky dynamics I have with myself. So an interesting part that I have really enjoyed on my journey of inner child work is to give those parts of myself that maybe were not allowed a seat at the table when I was younger. I make room for them at the table now. And not only do I make room for them, I celebrate them, play with them, express with them, dance very silly like with them. And I think it keeps me connected to a certain part of my vitality and like freshness that I would not have if I didn't allow those inner children to frolic and play and take up that space now. So while I have had definitely some deep reckonings with inner child work as well, there has been many a crunchy shadows. I have quite a few very snarky little kids in there who have one heck of a will. It's a lot of the battle of the wills for me is something that I struggle with. I can be quite determined, and that definitely has been an aspect of myself through all the years. So when I go and I meet an inner child who might be a little stuck in the ways, it gives me a lot of respect for like my mom or people who might have had to deal with a pissed off 7-year-old Melanie. um, she's a force. So I think I've really had to take, and this is honestly something I'm so excited about our retreat that we have planned and working with mushrooms in regards to inner child work, is taking that playfulness, taking that childlike sense of wonder, of discovery, of lightheartedness back in there with me and say, hey, you don't have to be smart and figure it all out and get all intellectual about it. Like you can just be, you can take up space. And I've had to work really hard to allow space for that in my inner family and my dynamic. And that's been really healing for me. Of course, different people have different types of parts, and that just might be a very specific antidote for some of my internal dynamic. But I think one of the biggest gifts that I'm playing around with, and one of the most lovely experiences I've had with inner child work, is just to make space for that joy. Because I think a lot of the time as a kid, you're so full of life. You have so many ideas. You want to talk all the time. You don't want to go to sleep because you're going to think, you're going to create, you're going to dream. You're pumped to be alive. And I think in many really subtle, tiny ways throughout our childhood and high school and then life and society and all the things that can get really sapped out of us. So it's just been like a internal energy drink for me, really, where I just say, yeah, no, bring it back up. You get a seat here. We're going to listen to you. You're running the show today. You're talking a lot, but that's cool. You got a lot to say then. And just playing around with it, keeping it lighthearted for me has been a big, lovely adventure.
I love that because that's another piece I think that's really important about inner child work is like as adults, we get weighed down by belief systems, life. And yeah, it's like we start going back to those inner child pieces. You start to discover those gifts that they hold. And like, you start working with them and they start to feel whole again, like that inner teenager, like, certain parts of us might hold like that playfulness or that curiosity or like our innocence, we can lose our innocence and take things too personally. It's like, and then life becomes scary when we lose our innocence because we think that we're inherently bad. And so we can't, it's hard to take steps forwards in life and want to move forward because we always think somebody's going to be punishing us for doing something bad. But like when you're a child and you're just being creative and you're learning, it's like, you just, you get your hands dirty. You try and make a mud pie and you realize, oh, I can't actually eat this. And, you're learning, or maybe you try first. Like we do things like that and it becomes fun and life becomes an experiment. And that's like that learning ground that makes life fun and joyful and light. And I think that's what a lot of us are seeking as adults when we start leaning into doing inner work.
And I'd really like to hear your experience. What is it that you do, or what kind of experiences you've had to get in touch with your inner child then?
Yeah, I would love to hear from you, Alana, in regards to your experience with inner child work, parts work, and what and how you've kind of worked with those dynamics.
Yeah, that's a journey for sure. I think my inner child journey started kind of around the same time that maybe my spiritual journey kind of started to get deeper. I was going through a time in my life where I just didn't really know the point. I definitely had been going through addictive patterns and was really unhappy with the life I was living, felt very victimized by my own patterns, very stuck in old ways. And I had found a shaman, healer that I was working with, and she did hypnotherapy and shaman work as well. And so we started diving into the realm of inner children. It just kind of naturally started to come up. So I started working with these inner parts. And so she was definitely a guide for me in like kind of catalyzing that process of, viewing the inner child as like something like almost like an entity that is kind of separate from me in order to work with it. Because before that I had been always within that place. And once you're in that like 2-year-old mind space, it feels very disempowering to try and make the change because you just don't know. You need that support outside of you. So to kind of, in a way, like you're already split, but to kind of split yourself and approach it from that adult self, felt very productive for me. It worked. And I started to notice some shifts in the way that I showed up and brought back different parts, felt more myself, brought back innocence. And then it definitely got a lot deeper when I started doing work with plant medicine. Within my journeys, I would have inner child pieces come up. I would visit memories from the past, and I was able to go to some quite traumatic spaces that when I felt, I think your spirit gives you what you need when you're ready. So it wasn't like I just dove right in. But it did feel sometimes when I went to some of these places, like the amount of work that I would have to do with these inner children was months, months and months of working with these parts, nervous system work, desensitization work, feeling things that I didn't feel comfortable feeling, accepting things that I didn't want to accept. And with all of that with such deep love and reverence. So definitely plant medicine has been a big piece of that puzzle. And it's something that I totally feel like what we mentioned earlier, like, I'll have old child parts come back to me that I thought I'd integrated in. It's like, oh, no, there's more there. And I used to be impatient and frustrated with that. And now it's like, you know what? How beautiful is it that I can mine one experience? I don't have to have another traumatic experience in my life. I can go back to a part of my past and keep mining that for the gems, keep mining that for, the shifts. And so I'm really enjoying that process. But yeah, I really think it is important to note that I think I did feel like it was very heavy work for a long time. And it took a while for me to get to the point where, like you said, Melanie, like making space for that joy, making space for that play. And for me, it's kind of come more natural, but it's definitely something that I have to be cognizant of, is not always looking at my child from that wounded space. And that's a really great reminder. So thank you for that.
I think you brought up so many good pieces in there too, especially the plant medicine piece, because it gives such perspective to what's going on, right? And we've talked about it, we've mentioned it a few times, how we as individuals get to go back into those time periods and we have more of that bird's eye view, more of that omniscience. We can take a observer approach, and that is the first step. Bringing that awareness is the first step to helping to meet those needs, manage those emotions, move forward. And I think plant medicine makes that observer effect times 1,000. Like for me, it's like, okay, not only can I see what's going on, like I'm watching this 3D movie. I know this person's in and out. And then I've got the plant medicine narrator who's on top of that, doubling down, being like, you see what I'm saying? There's this whole dynamic here. You see this? I'm pointing at it. You gonna learn, you gonna look at it. And it's, but it's such a perspective thing. It's a shift. It really zooms you out. And I think that gives you enough, just enough objectivity. And I think that's really key when we're looking at some of those really heated moments, like you were saying, when you're a 2-year-old and you are up close and you are experiencing those emotions, you do not feel like that's not happening anymore. You get transported right back to that fight or flight response. Your body is frozen in time and you are reliving that. And that is very real. And for that objectivity, especially with plant medicine, is such a gift. It really just takes it off your face a bit, gives you an opportunity to have that perspective, brings you out of that reactionary state, and gives you the tools, or the time at least, to then navigate, maneuver, get some perspective, get some understanding. And it's such a beautiful combination, inner child work and plant medicine at large. For me, again, specifically with psilocybin, but all plant medicine that I've experienced works well with that kind of parts work and inner child exploration.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that psilocybin, for me as a plant teacher, has always shown up very childlike, very playful. And so I think that it is a beautiful pairing. I would agree. There's a gentleness to it. In certain cultures, we mentioned this in our previous podcast, they're known as the children, the mushrooms are, right? And so, especially here in Mexico. And so, yeah, it's to be able to engage with a teacher that kind of brings that vibration, brings that lightheartedness, brings that curiosity, is such a beautiful gift. And yeah, it takes you out of that, allows you, like you said, to see it objectively. And that's beautiful. Or to feel through it fully if you never did. It creates that space to be held as well too. But yeah.
That is such a good point.
Yeah, and there's no right way to have a journey. I mean, I don't want to say that anyone doing inner child work is it's gonna look like that, but you know, it's something that can definitely happen for sure.
Well, that's so true though. Like you're either given that objectivity and then you like mentally figure it out and you recognize the pattern, or that's not the medicine at all that you're in need of. And I've had psilocybin, I've had ayahuasca put me right back down into the middle of that whole ass experience, and I'm going through the whole thing again. And we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again until I feel through, which is a gift in and of itself, especially for my experience with psilocybin. I can feel one feeling very fully, as opposed to feeling a little bit confused, a little bit happy, with all of those like interlaced dynamics, right? When I'm working with mushrooms in particular, I can really feel like all of the love frequency throughout my whole body at once, or also all of the terror or all of the anxiety. And it's very all consuming, right? So I think sometimes, like, that's a brilliant point, and I'm happy you mentioned that, because that is exactly the medicine sometimes. And those can be not as easy of journeys when you are right back in that emotional loop or that trauma cycle, and you are now reliving, walking through step by step. And until some kind of pivot, some new understanding, some subtle shift occurs, or those emotions are simply released, a lot of the time that plant medicine will hold you there and work with some of those more gnarlier cyclical experiences. And yeah, she can be intense. Shannon, what's your experience working with? I know you personally, so I know that I believe there are some of your experiences where you've had plant medicine assist or add insight, or maybe work with some of your own inner child parts or parts work at large.
Oh yes. I would say probably my first experience with ayahuasca was very interesting for me. It wasn't very strong. It was actually felt, but there was this echo of my past. And for some reason, like, this may sound a little obscure and abstract, but the plants call to you before you even go into ceremony. As you know, as if you've never done this before, you'll probably end up starting having dreams before you go into ceremony. One of the dreams that I ended up having was of a umbrella, and it said, just follow the umbrella. And now there's a little side thing about umbrellas in my past, which I won't go into, but when I was sitting there going, it's not really working. What's going on? Nothing's happening. But I kept hearing a little faint voice, leave her alone, leave her alone. What is going on? And then all of a sudden I remembered, follow the umbrella, follow the umbrella. Okay, sure. And I sort of just imagined this umbrella, and I let go, and then boom, this memory came back to me of a childhood trauma. And I went, oh my God, how could I forget about that? I can't believe I blocked that out. And it was a huge memory that just all of a sudden came back to me. And that's the first time, and I think the only time, that a specific memory came back that I had blocked out. And I have a lot of blocked memories from the past, but that very first time was the first time it was a key that unlocked a very important memory that I needed to really go through and to start to heal. And that was amazing, a massive shift for me in terms of my healing my inner child. Yeah, I see that.
Mm-hmm. I love how you said that it was a gentle almost experience, or ayahuasca was at least rather gentle in that approach, because I think sometimes too, when heavier topics come up, or intense moments can come up, a lot of people, maybe people who haven't worked with plant medicine at all, might think that like they're getting punished or they're getting put through a ringer or something like that. But there is so much room for nuanced dynamics when we're working with plant medicine, to have some of those larger dynamics brought forward rather gently on the scale of experience, because that's been my experience as well. As whenever there's like a heavier hitting topic or something that could be profound or could be scary or could be, big for us, often ayahuasca or mushrooms or whatever spirit you're working with can choose to do that gently as well. So it's just so interesting to hear how having a whole memory brought back can be delivered on gentle little wings as opposed to earth-shattering chaos,
I've had both.
Yeah, 100%. Both of those exist.
Yeah. And I do feel that with any plant medicine, you do start to develop a relationship with them, and there's a trust that occurs. And then you can, once you kind of get used to doing the inner child work, you kind of get into the groove of it, like you said, and then you get used to showing up for yourself and holding space for yourself. And the plants can kind of teach you, or the spirits can kind of teach you that process as well too. So then each time you can kind of come back, you feel a little bit more held. Again, I'm saying this, and you know, I still could have a hellish journey in the future. I'm not saying I won't, but
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
there's still this trust in, like, you know, whatever you experience is exactly what you need to experience in the way that you need to experience, in order to integrate, open, and start to heal, like you said, from some of these spaces that, you know, we've been holding on to and carrying like baggage for who knows how many years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And also with that work in plant medicine, it really helps us let go of the control that we've been holding on to with these death grip. And so when we can let go of that control, then we can hold more space. Like it's like, you know, you have this, your fists are so tight, but when you can relax into the medicine, relax into the healing, then you can open up for that hug.
Mm. Totally, yeah. It is this right?
Yeah.
You don't even know you're gripping until you let go. You're like, oh God, that was heavy. I didn't know I was holding that forever. Yeah. Like, fascinating.
Yeah, that was a big teaching in one of my first ceremony experiences was like, oh, you didn't even know the different ways in your life you're trying to control. Like, you don't know. And you know what? That's the other thing is you don't know what you don't know. And that's, that's why it's a blessing and a gift to have that perspective capacity with the plants and that relationship in that ceremony. It's definitely something that has moved me beyond myself in many ways, many times.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that kind of brings us to, I guess, our next question when we're talking about our retreat that we are hosting in the summer, Once Upon a Mushroom. Shannon is going to be a facilitator offering some beautiful workshops with inner child work. And the modality you use is a form of resonance. Are you able to kind of explain that process? I know it's a challenging one to explain, but I've experienced it and I found it very powerful. So
I'm so excited because I haven't experienced it and I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
Yes, it's a very interesting sort of abstract way of we all have resonance in terms of when we meet somebody for the first time, you automatically get a feeling of a person, or we can read a room. That's natural resonance that we have. We all have that within ourselves. And so if you're familiar with family constellation work, what I've done is a branch from that. Now I'll explain that a little bit, where in family constellation work, you assign people your family members, and then they resonate, those family members, for you to be able to have a conversation, talk with them, and things start to shift and move, and people are resonating these characters for you. Now, Franz Rupert, in the IOPT, it's called, which is Identity Development Work, worked with that modality for a number of years and realized there's a little piece missing. And this piece is that these are actually parts that are in us. It's really not that is our mother, that's my father, that's my sister. It's that is my perception of those people and how they're showing up within me. So they change the view, where now this is the hard part to explain. So when we are doing a session, we start with, of course, what's most up for a person. So if, say, what's up could be anything from, I want to work on my weight, or I want to quit smoking, or I want to X, Y, and Z. And these are just our natural ways of what we want in our life for our growth. But if we're stuck there somewhere, then that's our inner child going, I don't believe that we can do that, and I've got something holding us back. So now we get to look at it by picking it apart. So we take the sentence of intention, and if we say, maybe my first example was, I want to lose weight. So we can pick a sentence apart and have an I want, let's say 3 words. I want lose or weight. So you can choose, but it all encompasses the same sentence. It's not, not going to lose or dilute what that is. If we're picking it apart, it's all going to be in that container. So in the room of people, what's going to happen is I would say, okay, out of the 3 words that I chose in my sentence, I need 3 people to resonate that I want and wait. So when I say, Mel, could you please resonate my I? So, okay, yes, I'll resonate your I for you. Alana, could you please resonate my want? Okay, yes, I'll resonate your want for you, etc., etc. Now, in resonating, you're not thinking about the I, you're not thinking about any particular person or thing. You're just letting the feelings come up of whatever could come up. And that's where you really have to let go, let the mind clear, let that resonating just flow through you. And then this is where the dynamic starts to have this conversation with these parts of yourself. And Mel, if you're resonating the I could be something you would never expect. Maybe the I is a shut off part of yourself. Maybe the want is a needy part of yourself. Maybe the weight is an angry part. So you get to talk to these parts and you get to have a conversation, and they can even talk to themselves as well. And this is where you get to see these parts of yourself that are showing up in ways that you get to see as an outside observer, but also how you are talking to these parts as well. And this is what I was saying earlier on in the conversation, where I can be so frustrated, say, for example, with the I part that is angry because I'm so sick and tired of that part of me that keeps showing up as angry. So now I would start getting angry at that angry part. So then you can kind of start to see your patterns of how you show up for yourself. And it's a very interesting dynamic, and there's no way to have any resolve. It can resolve in a beautiful ending. It can resolve in okay, that part just needs to, like you said earlier, Mel, that I need to just let that part be and not push that part. I'm just going to give it space. So then it's just having a conversation with these people who you get to see yourself in a 3D almost space of holding space for these parts and having conversations with all of these parts in a circle. It can be very, let me think here. It can be very profound in how you see yourself in parts. Now, if you are entangled with parts that might be, say, a parent, then we can bring in the mom, and suddenly, like I was saying earlier, that can sort of shift everybody's. Suddenly maybe one part might become scared and want to hide, and all of a sudden their age shifts from that angry teenager, and boom, they've shifted into a really scared, traumatic toddler. And now all of a sudden, ooh, okay, now we got to deal with this toddler, and how can we help this toddler now that it's all of a sudden shifted into a much younger part. So we can get deeper and deeper into other parts of ourselves that keep getting shifting. And it's very organic way of working with our psyche. So I know that you've had experience. Could you expand on what your experience was?
Yeah, it was very vulnerable in a good way. I felt very seen, and it was also just like, yeah, like it was a way for me to see something that I couldn't see because, like you said, it was happening in real time. I was almost like witnessing other people's body language, expressions. Yeah, and it's a group thing, which is cool, and there's like healing in that as well too, to be able to understand that inner child work, these parts work, like how dynamic they are and like how they interplay with each other. It was very profound, and it gave me good insight into part of me that I didn't even know needed some attention, like it's just, it was surprising how powerful it was. And I know it's one of these things, it's really hard to explain. It's way better if you can kind of experience it.
But it's interesting that you say that when you saw things that you didn't think, and you see a body thing, you're like, oh, I do that. Oh, yeah, totally. I didn't. Oh, right. And then all of a sudden you're just like, I didn't realize that that's what that looked like when somebody else starts to react the way that you have, but you don't actually see it outside. So it's a really cool experience.
It is. It's really neat. I don't know if you want to try and do it with Melanie on camera, if you want to try and do a little piece, or if not, that's okay too.
We can experiment. I don't know if it'll work in a short amount of time, but we can try and then see if something comes up for you. But that's up to you, Melanie.
Well, I know that we are probably going to be exploring this a little bit more in our live webinar, so I think it might be a good idea we can leave it to the live webinar so that we can give it ample amount of time and do a bit of a dive in at that time. The webinar is going to be in a few months from now. We'll have more information all about the Once Upon a Mushroom retreat. We'll ask Shannon back on to have some maybe more conversations around inner child work, and we can revisit that there, in which I will gladly publicly resonate. I just want to make sure that we have an opportunity to expand upon it and give it its rightful attention, so that we can also maybe bring in some other people who are going to attend the retreat, answer some questions, and have that special time with people in that capacity too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Mm-hmm. That leads us to kind of, I think, our final piece, which is really talking about our Once Upon a Mushroom retreat coming up and the kind of inner child work we're going to be doing there. Obviously, we have Shannon, who's going to be doing her resonance work, and maybe some other fun kind of playful workshops alongside us as we journey with psilocybin. And, this retreat, like we talked about with Tammy in the previous podcast as well, is going to be taking place outdoors, in nature, with play, with creativity, and it's going to be a nice deep dive into reconnecting with the nature of our own inner child, and that play, and that curiosity. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that, Mel.
I think I've said I'm excited so often, but I really am, because it's like putting your inner children in a sandbox and just giving the reins back over, right? It's a place of radical permission, radical acceptance, being free, letting your inner children come home, just relaxing into existing without having to cater to expectations. There is just a few keywords that always stand out for me when I really feel into Once Upon a Mushroom. And it is always just permission, surrender, acceptance, permission. And then after that, it's that excitement piece, the joy piece. What's the point of doing all of this work if we're not embodied, if we're not bringing those pieces back home? There's always a tender reminder of the end game for me is that I get to have an opportunity to show up and serve this world and bring my authentic light to this world by bringing all those little parts of me back home into the present moment. And it enables me to play fully and create fully and co-create and explore and do all of the things that Melanie signed up to come to the earth to do. So all of that is wrapped up in this retreat. I know that we have all of our mental creative juices flowing. There are going to be, like we've mentioned, somatic workshops. We are going to be tapping into that creativity, maybe some tribal body paint. Maybe we're going to run and frolic through the forest. Maybe we're, the world is our oyster, but it's just such an ultimate place of acceptance and permission and play for me. I'm so grateful and excited to be co-creating with you, lovely ladies. And I am so excited to see the people who are called to this work with us. It's very exciting. I'm excited. If you haven't heard.
Yes, we're excited too. Me too. Yeah, such work, and also so beautiful and fun, like you mentioned. And Yeah, it's going to be great.
Mm-hmm. I think too, the other piece I want to talk about, because it is such an asset and something that I'm excited to work with potentially in the retreat, would be the fact that Shannon has a inner child work journal. You've created a whole journal. And there are prompts. It's gorgeous. I've seen photos. Shannon, in and of herself, is an artist. She is someone who, while I'm on the waxing poetic train, has always made me feel safe, accepted, like I have a seat at the table. She is a beautiful permission slip to embody and feel and show up and be authentic. And there's a vibrancy in your energy that I just so appreciate. And I can see it all over your inner child work journal. I can see it in your art. I can see it in your little bright little heart over there. And I would love to hear about your journey to creating that book, because it is such a wonderful practical tool. And I am a sucker for stationary and practical tools.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really from divine spirit. It just sort of came to me to be able to do this last year. And so it's been a year of creating and getting it out into the world. So what I love about, like you're saying, I'm an artist. So every cover on this inner child journal, you can choose from about 7 different covers that I've created the art myself. So you can have 7 different art journals with all the same content on the inside. And on the inside, there's beautiful pages with mandalas that have evening gratitude pages. There's contemplation pages. There's also breathing exercises. There's about 3 different breathing exercises. There's quotes from different people around the world. Then there's also I was telling you earlier about the automatic writing. There's the automatic painting. We get into the forgiveness letters, the Ho'oponopono prayer. We talk about the ACEs, which are the adverse childhood experiences that are very enlightening for, what we've gone through as, growing up as children. So there's a lot of information in there, and it's just a really fun journal that I'm super excited about. And I just have it on in excuse me for a second. So there's a couple different ways that you can get the journal. You can go to my website, which is silvermoon-coaching.com, and it's under the inner child button column there. And it's got all the extra pages if you want to flip through them and see which ones you like. Also, you can go to Amazon, and if you go under the Healing the Inner Child Journal by Shannon Silvermoon, that'll get you there too. So 2 different ways to reach me, and get your journal. And it's a lot of fun. You can work through it together with me, reach out. We can do classes, courses together with it. And if there's some parts that are a little sticky for you, I can definitely help you through a lot of that work for you. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll link that below as well so people can have access to it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like such a wonderful synthesis and culmination of your own personal experience. And I know that I believe his name's Dean Graziosi, but he always talks about turning the mess into our message. And I think it's such a beautiful example of how you get to work through that alchemization process and turn some of that stickiness in yourself as an opportunity to come forward and serve people, right? Like show someone, light the path of someone else, right? Just help a friend out. And I feel like that's such a good energy that I feel behind, I guess, the journal that you've written. And I'm excited to look into getting my own copy. It's also something I think that would be really helpful to help people prepare for the Once Upon a Mushroom retreat, would be doing those prompts, following those exercises, and getting acquainted with that inner family landscape, our inner dynamics, all of those relationships inside of ourselves that way as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate the support and the love, and it's exciting. I'm looking forward to being on the land with you ladies and all the people that are going to be joining us, and it's just going to be a wonderful retreat. I'm so excited that we get to do this and co-create together.
Yeah. That's me too. Me too.
Lovely. Well, again, thank you for everybody who is listening or watching the Sacred Seat podcast. Shannon, Alana, and I had an incredible time touching base and getting to connect with you all today. And we will see you all back here very shortly for another episode where we deep dive, discuss, and elaborate on all things spiritual, human expansion, crazy experience that we all have an opportunity to live through. So thank you for being here, and bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.